I traced the door's grain pattern with my thumb. The wood cool as sun-bleached bone. Scorched earth. That's impossible. The cabin's hallway had been empty yesterday. Now this door stood where the wall should be, its grain mimicking cracked soil under a dead sun. Thunder rolled in the distance, a low growl that never reached the peaks, just a vibration in the floorboards. I pressed my palm flat against it. No warmth, just dry cold, like petrified bone. The static hum from the film Real's cursed presence vibrated in my molars, a low thrum that made my teeth ache. I should have walked away. I'm Milo Jackson, a clinical psychologist who studies trauma, not haunted doorways in national park cabins. But I tested the handle anyway. It turned with a rusted twinned click hisser, the sound of old hinges grinding in a dry well. The cat watched from the trail's edge, ancient as the mountains themselves, its graying whiskers twitching. Cataracts clouded its eyes, milky and unblinking. It didn't move, just observed. The door swung inward, revealing only darkness deeper than the alpine night. My shadow, the one I'd been chasing since my mother's funeral, stretched across the floorboards. It reached out, fingers of shadow curling toward the threshold. Click, hiss, the sound of the door opening. The cat's claws scraped glass with a dry rattle like peeling tape. I felt the static hum in my teeth, a metallic taste spreading. My hand, I realized, was already reaching into the blackness. The darkness didn't pull. It haven't sucked her. My fingers vanished. Cold seeped into my knuckles, a damp chill that had no business in this dry air. I tried to pull back, but the shadow's grip on my arm felt like stone. The static hum intensified, vibrating the back of my throat. The cat's head tilted, a slow, deliberate motion. Its whiskers twitched again, as if counting the seconds. I felt the cold seep up my arm, a sensation like wet parchment tearing. The doorframe was smooth, unyielding. I pulled my hand back. My fingers emerged, trembling, the skin around my nails already stained a deep wet crimson. I stared at them. The blood wasn't mine. It was thick, viscous, clinging to the doorframe like tar. And where my fingertips had been, the wood grain showed faint, blood-moistened prints, as if the door had tin-pulled, the blood from my skin. The cat's claws scraped glass again, a dry, deliberate scrape, and I realized I hadn't heard it move. I'd been watching the trail, not the door. The blood prints were still wet. The static hum in my teeth stopped. The silence was louder than the thunder. The film reel hissed between my fingers like a dying breath, its celluloid coiled tight as a noose. I didn't think, only acted. The memory of her voice, raw and splintered, still clawed at my ribs, and I crushed the reel in my fist. The plastic casing groaned, then split with a wet thumping snap, like ice cracking under a boot. Black fluid oozed between my fingers, thick as oil, and the static hum in my molars sharpened into a whine, a sound that vibrated the fillings in my teeth like tuning forks. My jaw ached, my vision tunneling as the reel's fragments scattered across the floorboards. Each shard skittered, catching the dim light like broken glass, and the scent of burnt sugar filled the air sweet, acrid, clinging to the back of my throat. The cat didn't move. It stood just beyond the threshold of the hallway, its claws dragging against the window pane in slow, deliberate strokes. The glass resisted, but the sound was a wet tuscree, like a blade being dragged through fat. The cat's cataracts glowed. No, pulsed, a sickly amber, not from any light, but from something deeper, something feeding on the static's hum. My hands trembled. The blood on my fingers from yesterday's door still clung to my skin, but now it felt wrong, too thick, too presenter. The cat's whiskers twitched, counting. I knew it was counting the seconds until it took something else. Then the reel's remnants twitched. A single frame had detached itself from the pile, lying flat on the floorboards. It wasn't film anymore. It was his skin, stretched thin over something dark and glistening. My mother's scream unspooled from it, not through sound but through the air itself, a vibration that made my ribs ache. The words weren't words. They were siftith, sharp and jagged, tearing at my throat. I gagged, my hands flying to my neck, but the scream was already inside me, a knife twisting in my esophagus. The cat's claws stilled, the glass held its breath, and then my left eye footy popped. Not like an explosion, not like a burst balloon, like a ripe fruit splitting under pressure. The pain was a white-hot lance, but it was gone before I could scream. My fingers flew to my face, pressing against the hollow where my eye had been. The skin was warm, pulsing, like an open wound. The cat's voice slithered into my skull, smooth as oil, familiar as my own, Milo. The static hum stopped. The cabin fell silent. My throat burned, raw as sandpaper. The cat's claws resumed their scraping, slow and deliberate, as if it were sharpening a blade against the glass. The blood on my fingers had dried to a crimson crust, but my finsun meisingai, left a wet, glistening trail down my cheek, and the cat smiled. The shadow. It wasn't a mere absence of light, it moved. I watched it, a grotesque mimicry of my own posture as I paced the cabin floor. Each step I took, it echoed, a delayed, distorted imitation. The scorched earth tones of the walls seemed to absorb it, deepening the gloom. The air tasted like iron filings. My reflection in the warped window pane was a stranger thudi, a man whose movements were subtly, unsettlingly off-kilter. The static hum resonated in my teeth, a constant low thrum that vibrated the enamel. It intensified as the cat's claws scraped against the glass, a rhythmic switch, critch, scritch that felt less like sound and more like a physical pressure against my skull. The sound was accompanied by the faint, almost subliminal, a vompwood of the distant thunder, a promise of a storm that never arrived. It felt deliberate. The cat sat perfectly still, a graying statue against the fading light. Its amber cataracts pulsed, not with light but with a viscous internal energy. It wasn't looking to me. It was looking to me. It was looking to me. A cold certainty settled in my gut. It was leading me somewhere. I found myself drawn to the doorway, toward the trail that wound into the peaks. Each footfall crunched on the gravel path, a brittle counterpoint to the incessant static. The air grew colder, a damp chill that seeped into my bones. I registered the scent of pine needles, sharp and clean, but beneath it, a deeper, more primal odor. The smell of damp earth and something else. Something raw. My left hand felt numb, detached. I looked down. The skin was stretched taut, the veins pulsing beneath the surface like thick black worms. It felt wrong, the blood from yesterday's encounter. The faint coppery tang clinging to my fingers seemed to have intensified, a sickly sweetness on my tongue. The cat let out a low, guttural sound, a rumble that resonated not in the air but directly in my chest, a silent command. I took another step. The trail narrowed, the trees crowding in, their branches clawing at the sky. A sudden, sharp pain ripped through my left forearm. A searing, precise incision. I looked down. My hand lay severed on the path, a crimson bloom spreading across the gray stones. It wasn't a clumsy wound, not a frantic slash. It was surgical. Clean. The static hum spiked, a wave of nausea over me. I stared at the severed hand, a detached observer. It was smaller than I remembered. The knuckles, the lines of my palm, they were unfamiliar. A wave of panic threatened to drown me, but I fought it back, clinical detachment, analyze. Observe. The cat's mouth moved. It didn't make a sound, but the message was clear. A silent, predatory grin stretched across its face. A terrible, voiceless laughter that echoed in the hollows of my skull. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, a strangled gasp. My voice. It was gone. The journal page was a charred scrap, the edges singed as if plucked from a fire, but the ink still bled through the cracks like rust. The cat is me. The words pulsed beneath my fingers, the paper warmed to the touch, as though the memory of the handwriting still lingered in the fibers. My teeth ground together. Wugra. The static hum vibrating through my molars, a low, insistent 40 whir that made my fillings ache. The air smelled of burnt sugar, and something older, the scent of a forest floor, after a storm that never came. My fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of the truth settling in my skull. The trail behind me was a scar. The earth wasn't just scorched, it was soy-peeled, the soil flaking away like dead skin, exposing veins of something dark and glistening beneath. The cat had walked into the mountain, and the mountain had swallowed it whole. No prints remained, no fur, no whisper of claws against stone. Only the trail, now a wound in the earth, weeping a slow, viscous ooze that hissed when it touched the air. I reached up, my scalp was slick. Not with sweat, but with something thicker, something that clung to my fingertips like syrup. I didn't remember tearing my hair out. I didn't remember the feeling. The skin beneath my fingers was too smooth, too wrong. The ridges of my skull, pressing against the tips like the grooves of a broken record. The static spiked, a sharp crackle, and for a moment the world tilted. The trees, the sky, the jagged teeth of the mountain. All of it bent at an angle as if viewed through warped glass. The cat's eyes, they weren't in the mountain anymore. They were sphere. The cataracts had split open like overripe fruit, the pupils dilating into vertical slits black and endless as a cave mouth. The reflection wasn't mine. It was the mountains, the jagged peaks, the scorched earth, the fundrongness of it all. It was all in those eyes. The static howled, a distorted that screech, and the world twin-peeled. With it, my fingers dug into my scalp. The skin didn't give. Not like skin should. It twin-zipped, twinned. The sound was wet, a slow schlup like parchment tearing underwater, and then, rip, the flap of flesh peeled back, my skull exposed beneath raw and glistening. The pain wasn't there, not yet, but the footy weight was. The weight of something moving beneath my skin, something that wasn't me, something that had been waiting. The cat's tongue, rough as sandpaper, traced the edge of the wound. I didn't scream. I didn't try breathe. The mountain's eyes blinked. And then the static cut out, silence. The trail behind me was gone. The mountain was gone. Only the cat remained, its fur now the color of ash. Its mouth stretched too wide, too fumen, whispering, "Now you see." The film reel hissed like a snake shedding skin, the casing slick with a residue that smelled of burnt hair and old wine. I sat in the dark, my back against the cold, splintered wood of the cabin wall, the floorboards creaking beneath me like a thing alive. The screen flickered, my mother's face pale and bloated, her lips peeled back in a silent scream, the skin around her eyes sagging like melted wax. The static hum vibrated in my jaw, a low, wet 44 that made my molars ache. I clenched my teeth, but the sound didn't stop. It twimplestead a rhythm that matched the thud of my own heartbeat, but wronger for darker. The film played again. This time I saw the fire. The smoke was thick, the kind that clings to your throat and burns your lungs from the inside. I was there, I remembered, the crackle of flames, the heat of the air, the way the wood screamed as it burned. But the screen showed me standing outside, my hands clenched into fists, my face twisted in a way I didn't recognize. I didn't remember feeling that rage. I didn't remember Fiffoot watching her die. I didn't remember anything. The static howled, a wet screech that made my ears ring. The screen blurred, the image of my mother dissolving into a black hole that swallowed the room whole. The cat's claws scraped against glass, a sound like a knife dragged across a frozen lake. I turned, my spine stiff, my breath shallow. The trail was gone. The mountain was gone. Only the cat remained, its fur now the color of ash. Its mouth stretched too wide, too seven human, whispering, "Tuvan, now you see." Its claws dragged again, the sound of fortish, like a broken scrubbing board splashing in a tub. I staggered forward, my legs unsteady, my vision blurring. The cat stepped closer, its body shifting, its form warping, the air around it twin stretching, like a rubber band pulled to its limit. I could see it now, the thing beneath the fur, the thing that had been waiting. It was me. It was myself, but wronger, older, with eyes that burned like coals and a mouth that stretched too wide. I reached for my tongue, but it wasn't there. The skin where it should have been was raw, glistening, the wound a perfect circle, the edges when sizzling like flesh meeting flame. I didn't scream, I didn't breathe. The cat's cataracts cleared, and for the first time I saw myself in its eyes. The mountain's eyes blinked. The reel sat in my palm, its edges jagged like the teeth of a saw, the celluloid slick with a sheen that wasn't oil but something darker, something Tordine breathing. My fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of it, the way it pulsed against my skin like a second heartbeat. The label was there now, etched into the metal casing in letters that hadn't been there before. Scorched earth reel, the scrubbing board. The ink was blackened at the edges, as if it had been scorched from the inside out. I pressed my thumb against it, and the metal groaned, a low, wetty that slithered up my arm, settling in my teeth. The static didn't just hum anymore. It screamed, a sound like 1,000 needles piercing wet parchment, and my molars ached in response, the pressure building behind my eyes until I thought my skull might split open. There was glass now too, a shard embedded in the floorboards at my feet, glinting dully in the dim light. I didn't need to look to know it. The sound of them scraping was already in my head, a shushkakad, like a rusted blade dragged across a frozen pond, the ice cracking but never breaking. My breath came shallow, my lungs filling with the acrid tang of burnt wool. The cabin smelled of it now, the air thick with the scent of something charred and wrong. I turned. It was standing just inside the doorway, its body coiled like a spring, its fur the color of old ash, the cataracts in its eyes clearing to reveal the void beyond twinny eyes. But deeper, darker, the pupils swallowing the irises whole. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The way it watched me, the way its whiskers twitched, sent a jolt of something raw and electric down my spine. My right eye was gone. The socket was smooth, The skin stretched taut over the empty space, the edges red and weeping, the air inside the cabin thickening with the scent of copper. I reached up, my fingers hovering just above the wound, but the cat's tail lashed, the tip curling like a hook, and I flinched. The reel burned in my grip, not with heat but with a cold, creeping fire that spread up my arm, my chest, my throat. The static roared now, a wet twin whine that filled the cabin, the walls vibrating with it, the floorboards, finned groaning, like a thing in pain. I pressed the reel to my forehead, and the image bloomed behind my eyelids. Not fire this time, not smoke, but a room, a footy housey. The walls lined with scrubbing boards, the air thick with the scent of lye and something worse. A woman stood in the center of it, her back to me, her hair the color of burnt sugar, her hands moving in slow, deliberate circles over the boards. She turned, and her face, my face, was stretched too wide, the skin splitting at the corners of her mouth, her teeth bared in a grin that wasn't a grin but a warning. The boards screeched dead beneath her hands, a sound like nails dragged across wet glass, and the water in the sink began to bubble, the steam curling into shapes that twisted and writhed like living things. The cat's mouth opened. No sound came out, but the air fit moved, a draft that wasn't a draft, something that slithered into my lungs, filling me with a weight that wasn't weight but fiddy memory. I saw the fire again. The smoke, the way the wood screamed as it burned. I saw for myself standing outside, my fists clenched, my face twisted in a way I didn't recognize. I saw for myself watching her die. The reel burned hotter, the static of fort wail. Now, a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, and the cat's claws dug into the glass, the shard splintering, the pieces falling like rain, each one a thunk. That echoed in my bones. My face was hers now. The skin stretched, the muscles twitching, the bones sweating, shifting, the sockets deepening, the eyes clearing to reveal the void beyond. The cat's tail whipped around my ankle, the tip curling like a hook, and I fell forward. The reel still in my grip, the static of thunder roar now, a sound like the end of the world, and the shadow stepped into the void. I stepped out onto the trail, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and pine needles. The cat was nowhere in sight, but its presence lingered like a bad taste at the back of my throat. I could hear it, the shushkaka of its claws against glass echoing through the trees, a sound that set my teeth on edge. My shadow stretched out before me, long and thin, dancing with the flickering light from my lantern. It seemed to ripple in places as if something moved beneath its surface. I stopped, staring at it, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The cat's claws scratched again, closer this time, and my shadow twitched, a muscle spasm that sent a jolt of cold down my spine. I tested it with the toe of my boot. It walked on its own, stretching out ahead of me before snapping back into place when I moved forward. My breath caught in my throat, the static humming now not just in my teeth but inside my chest cavity, resonating against bone and flesh like a second heartbeat. The trail wound upward through a stand of ancient pines, their branches twisting overhead like skeletal fingers. The cat's claws scraped again, this time directly above me. I looked up, squinting into the darkness between the trees. There it was, a flash of gray fur, then gone, swallowed by shadow. My foot caught on something, root or rock. I didn't look down to see, and I stumbled forward, my hands hitting the ground hard enough to send a jolt of pain up my arms. The lantern rolled away, its light flickering wildly before settling onto a familiar sight, glass shards scattered across the trail like stars fallen from the night sky. The cat's tail lashed out, striking the nearest shard with a sound that echoed through me, a thunkin followed by 1,000 tiny cracks, each one resonating deep in my bones. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against something smooth and cool. The reel. It pulsed now like a heart beating beneath my touch. I pressed play. The static roared to life again, filling the air with its wet hiss. This time, though, there was something else, a rhythmic funt that mutt the beat of my own heart. The image bloomed behind my eyelids, me, standing in this very spot on this very trail, watching as a figure emerged from between two ancient pines. The cat, but not just any cat. It wore my face, my body went cold, then hot, rage boiling beneath my skin like lava. I tore the reel away, the image disappearing with it, leaving only darkness and that damned thuntvice. My heart, or something else. I lunged forward, hands outstretched, ready to grab hold of whatever was making that sound. But there was nothing. No cat, no figure wearing my face, just empty trail stretching out before me. The thumping stopped abruptly, replaced by a sudden silence so heavy it pressed against my ears like water. Then came the scratching again, a shh cucked loud enough to shake the trees above us. It echoed through the darkness, growing louder and closer until a glass shard exploded beside me, its pieces scattering across the ground like seeds from a rotten fruit. I spun around just as another one shattered behind me. Then another, and another. I dropped into a crouch, hands covering my head, heart hammering in my chest. The cat's claws struck again and again. Shockukad thumquark. Crack, each strike closer than the last until finally, a shard caught me across the back of the hand. A shallow cut, but deep enough to draw blood. I hissed at the sudden pain, my fingers instinctively reaching for the wound. That is when I felt it, the cat's tail wrapping around my wrist like a vine, its tip curling inward until it pierced flesh, with an almost gentle flippopee. Blood welled up around the intrusion, hot and sticky against my skin. The cat's claws scraped again, this time not on glass, but on something softer flesh. My own flesh. I looked down in horror as the cat began to carve into me. A precise surgical incision that seemed designed less for pain than for exposure, revealing layers of tissue beneath until finally, it reached my heart. The beat pulsed against its tip like a second heartbeat, slow and steady despite the chaos around us. I felt it then, not just rage but something else, something darker, despair. My shadow shifted again, this time stretching out behind me like a tendril reaching for light that wasn't there. It seemed to solidify before my eyes, arms forming from its edges, legs lengthening until they met the ground with a soft foot thud. Then came the face, a mirror image of mine but twisted somehow, deeper and darker. The cat's tail pulled away suddenly, leaving me gasping for breath as blood flowed freely down my arm. My heart throbbed where it had been pierced. A pulse sigh, not just against flesh but against something else too, bone. I looked up at the figure standing before me, the shadow wearing my face, and watched in horror as its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth stained black with blood. My own blood. I found the journal lying open on a rock, its pages soaked with rain and something darker. The ink bled through the paper, the words smudged and unrecognizable, except for one line, "The cat is me." While my breath came in shallow bursts, the static humming in my teeth like a live wire. I stared at the words, my fingers twitching as if they might erase them. The cat's claws scraped again, this time not on glass but on the stone beneath my feet. The sound was wet, like a scrubbing board splashing in a basin, the sound of something being cleaned, something being stripped away. The trail was gone, not just missing but erased, as if it had never been there at all. The trees stood in a perfect circle, their trunks smooth and unblemished, their branches pointing outward like the fingers of a hand. I turned in a slow circle, my shadow stretching out behind me, but it wasn't just my shadow anymore. It was something else. Something that moved when I didn't. Something that seemed to breathe in the absence of wind. The cat's cataracts cleared, revealing eyes that were not gray but something deeper. Something that reflected not the world around me but something inside me. I felt it then, not just the presence of the cat but the weight of something else, something that had been watching me all along. My own eyes, my own voice, my own name. The cat's tail curled around my wrist again, but this time it didn't pierce me. It simply held me there, suspended in the air between the trees, between the past and the future, between the man I was and the man I was becoming. I looked down at my hands, my fingers trembling. The skin was still there, but it felt wrong, like it had been replaced with something else. Something thinner, something more fragile. My bones, I realized with a sudden, sickening clarity, were gone. Not missing, not broken, but gone. The cat's shadow stretched out behind me, its edges solidifying, forming into something that was not a shadow but a shape, a form, a presence. It moved with me, but it was not me. It was something else. Something that had been waiting for this moment. The cat's claws scraped again, the sound of a scrubbing board splashing in a basin, the sound of something being cleaned, something being stripped away. I looked up at the figure standing before me, the shadow wearing my face, and watched in horror as its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth stained black with something that was not blood, my own blood. The cat's tail pulled away suddenly, leaving me gasping for breath as the figure's mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth stained black with something that was not blood. My own blood. The hum started in my molars before it reached my ears, thick, wet, like the inside of a bee's nest pressed against my skull. I clenched my teeth, but it didn't stop. It seeped through my jaw, vibrating my fillings loose, and I tasted the metallic tang of my own blood before I even realized my tongue had split. The air smelled of scorched wool and the damp rot of old bandages. The cat was beside me again, its claws dragging against the rock like a woman scraping grease from a pan, slow and deliberate. The sound made my stomach lurch. I didn't look down. I couldn't. The trail's edge was a jagged thing half swallowed by the earth. My shadow no forkin pulled at me like a fishing line through my ribs. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It had teeth now, jagged and blackened at the edges, and they clicked together in the dark behind me, hungry. The cat's whiskers twitched, and for the first time, I saw them not as grey but as something older, something that had been buried in the dirt for decades. They trembled against the wind, and the wind carried the scent of rust and something else. Something like the inside of a coffin. I stepped forward. The rock beneath my foot gave way. Not all the way. Not like a collapse, more like a thuva suggestion. The earth beneath me didn't break. It twitu unfolded. My leg didn't fall. It dissolved. The sound was wet, like the last sip of whiskey left in a glass thick, slow, and then gone. I was left standing on one knee, my sock still there, the hem damp with something that wasn't sweat. The cat's claws scraped again, this time against the hollow where my leg had been. The sound was worse now. It wasn't scraping. It was swin peeling. I looked down. The stump wasn't clean. It wasn't raw. It was wrinkled, like the skin of an old man who'd never seen the sun, and at the center where my bone should have been was a hollow dark as the inside of a well. The cat's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, and I swear it licked the wound, not with its mouth, with its spin shadow. The thing behind me leaned forward, its jaw unhinging like a snake's, and I saw the rows of needle-thin teeth coated in something black and glistening. Not blood, fufta. The cat's tail wrapped around my wrist again, but this time it wasn't pulling. It was holding me up. My weight wasn't on my knee anymore. It was on the cat's shadow, and the cat's shadow wasn't a shadow. It was a frickin' D. A dozen fingers, each tipped with claws, each pressing into my flesh, each fifth replacing. What had been taken? I screamed. The sound came out wrong. It wasn't my voice. It was the sound of wet parchment tearing, of a man's throat being slit from the inside out. The cat's eyes, the cat's teeth, glistened in the dark. The shadow behind me grinned, and I realized with a sickening clarity that it wasn't mimicking me anymore. It was Sudi wearing me. The cat's claws dug in, and then the cat's shadow moved. I watched the cat stand alone on the peak, its ancient whiskers trembling against the wind that carried the scent of rust and cold stone. It lifted the scrubbing board, wood grain worn smooth by centuries of use, and dragged it across a patch of glass embedded in the trail. The sound wasn't a scrape. It was the wet rasp of a knife on bone, each drag leaving a thin, glistening line on the glass that hadn't been there moments before. I tasted the copper tang of the mountain's blood in my mouth, the static hum vibrating in my molars like a trapped wasp. The cat didn't look at me. Its graying whiskers trembled with the effort, the glass screaming in high, thin notes that echoed inside my skull. The sound was wrong, too sharp, too wet, like a fresh cut being opened again and again. I tried to pull back, but the earth beneath me felt spongy, alive, resisting my weight. The cat's claws dug deeper into the glass, splitting it further, and I saw the glass shatter not into fragments, but into 1,000 tiny, perfect mirrors reflecting the same mountain peak over and over, each reflection slightly off, kilter like a warped dream. The glass didn't just break, it too unraveled, revealing the scorched earth beneath, the same earth that smelled of burnt wool and old bandages. The cat dragged aboard again, harder, and the glass screamed louder, a sound like wet parchment tearing. I could feel the vibration in my fillings, the metallic taste of blood flooding my tongue. The cat's shadow stretched across the trail, not a shadow, but a hand, fingers splayed pressing into the glass where it had scraped. The glass wasn't glass anymore. It was the mountain's skin peeling back to reveal the scorched earth beneath, glowing faintly like cooling embers. I saw the cat's eyes flicker. No, not eyes, but the hollows where its eyes should be, filled with the same tar-black gleam as the shadow behind me. The cat turned its head, slowly, deliberately, and for the first time I saw its mouth open, not to hiss, but to reveal rows of needle, thin teeth coated in the same glistening black substance. The scrubbing board scraped again, a sound like 1,000 tiny bones snapping, and the trail beneath the cat's feet dissolved into the scorched earth, the glass vanishing with a final wet winchink. Only the scorched earth remained, stretching endlessly, and the mountain's shadow, no longer a shadow, but a shape with a cat's graying whiskers and the weight of 1,000 lost identities. Wasu, the cat. The glass was gone, the trail was gone. Only the scorched earth, and the cat's shadow, holding the mountain's shape.